The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Hannah Turner's small farmhouse as the pounding on her door echoed like gunshots through the quiet evening air. Another eviction notice, she knew, but this time Elias Montgomery wasn't just sending paper, he was sending men. Colorado Territory, 1875. Ordway was hardly more than a dusty settlement clinging to life between the prairie and the mountains. But to Hannah, the modest homestead represented everything. 5 years of backbreaking work after her husband Thomas died from typhoid, leaving her alone with 15 acres, a half-built dream, and their life savings buried in soil that demanded sacrifice for every ear of corn it yielded. Miss Turner. The voice belonged to Amos Wilkes, Montgomery's man of business who took particular pleasure in delivering bad news. "You have until month's end. Mr. Montgomery has been more than patient." Hannah pulled open the door, chin high despite the terror clawing at her insides. At 26, the harsh frontier life had weathered her features but couldn't dim the fierce determination in her hazel eyes. Her auburn hair was twisted into a practical bun, her calloused hands gripping the doorframe. "I told Mr. Montgomery I'll have his money when the harvest comes in," she said, voice steady. "The agreement was the agreement," Wilkes interrupted, his thin lips curling beneath his meticulously groomed mustache, "was renegotiated when the railroad announced its plans. Surely you've heard. Land values have tripled. Your husband's arrangement is no longer economical." Behind Wilkes stood 2 men Hannah recognized from town hired muscle who'd broken up more than one saloon fight. The message was clear. "This is theft, plain and simple," Hannah said. "Thomas paid good money for this land. We have an agreement with Mr. Montgomery." "Had," Wilkes corrected, adjusting his spectacles. "Your husband is dead, Mrs. Turner, and unless you can pay the new price $3,000 by month's end, you'll be removed. Legally, I might add." Hannah's stomach dropped. $3,000 might as well be $3 million. Her crops were good this year, but not that good. Nothing would be. "That's impossible, and you know it," Wilkes merely smiled. "Then I suggest you start packing. Good day, Mrs. Turner." They departed, leaving Hannah alone on her porch as dusk settled over the land that had become her home, her livelihood, and the final resting place for her husband whose grave lay beneath the large oak tree on the western edge of the property. She wouldn't cry. Not yet. Thomas would have fought, and so would she. Miles away, Quinn Westfield guided his horse down Ordway's main street, dust billowing behind them. At 32, he'd seen enough of the world to recognize a town on the verge of transformation. Railroad towns grew like weeds after rain, and Ordway was showing all the signs: new construction, bustling saloons, and land prices climbing faster than a man could keep track. Quinn dismounted outside the Wayfarer's saloon, his tall frame and broad shoulders drawing glances from passers-by. His dark hair was longer than fashion dictated, and several days' stubble shadowed his jaw. The trail dust coating his clothes marked him as a traveler, but the quality of his attire and the custom Colt revolver at his hip suggested he wasn't hurting for money. "What brings you to our humble establishment?" asked the bartender as Quinn approached. "Information," Quinn replied, placing a silver dollar on the counter. "Looking to invest in some land. Heard the railroads coming through." The bartender nodded knowingly. "You and half the territory." "Most prime parcels are already spoken for." He slid a whiskey across the bar. "Elias Montgomery's got the best of it. Smart man, that one. Been buying up land for years, selling it off now at 10 times what he paid." Quinn took a measured sip. "Montgomery, where might I find him?" "Big house at the north end of town. Can't miss it. But I'll save you the trouble. Man doesn't sell to just anybody, particular about who he does business with." Quinn smiled slightly. "I can be persuasive." As evening fell, Quinn made his way to a modest boarding house, securing a room for the week. His reasons for being in Ordway weren't purely financial, though he kept that to himself. After years working cattle drives across Texas and investing wisely in ventures along the way, he'd amassed a comfortable fortune. But money didn't quiet the restlessness in his soul or erase the memories that drove him westward year after year. He'd come to Colorado searching for something he couldn't name, following rumors of opportunity like countless men before him. What he hadn't expected was to find himself in the middle of a land grab that felt all too familiar. Morning brought Quinn to the imposing home of Elias Montgomery, a two-story affair with a manicured lawn that seemed to mock the dry Colorado landscape surrounding it. The man himself was equally out of place, dressed in an Eastern suit despite the frontier setting, his silver hair and beard meticulously groomed. "Mr. Westfield," Montgomery said, extending his hand after his housekeeper showed Quinn into a lavishly furnished study. "I understand you're interested in acquiring property." Quinn took the offered hand. "Word travels fast in small towns. It's my business to know who's buying and selling," Montgomery replied smoothly. "Please sit." "Brandy," Quinn declined with a polite shake of his head. "Bit early for me. I'm looking for land with agricultural potential. 15, maybe 20 acres. Montgomery's eyebrows rose slightly. "Farming? You don't strike me as a man who's spent much time behind a plow, Mr. Westfield." "I've worn many hats," Quinn answered, meeting the older man's calculating gaze. "Right now, I'm interested in putting down roots." "Well, you're in luck. I happen to have a parcel coming available at month's end, 15 acres, good water access, decent soil. Previous owner couldn't make a go of it." Montgomery's tone suggested this was a common occurrence. "I'd like to see it." Montgomery studied him for a moment. "Of course, my associate, Mr. Wilkes, can take you tomorrow." He named a price that made even Quinn, with his considerable means, blink. "Seems steep for unimproved land," Quinn observed. Montgomery's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Railroad's coming, Mr. Westfield. This time next year, you'll wish you'd bought every acre I offered." Quinn left with an appointment to view the property, but something about Montgomery's manner left him uneasy. The older man had been too eager, too certain Quinn would pay whatever price he named. That afternoon, Quinn visited the land office, reviewing public records of property transactions in the area. The clerk, a young man with ink-stained fingers, seemed surprised by his interest. "Most folks just take Montgomery at his word," he commented as Quinn examined a map of local properties. "I prefer doing my own research," Quinn replied. His finger traced the boundary of the 15-acre parcel Montgomery had mentioned. "What can you tell me about this one?" The clerk hesitated. "Turner property. Thomas Turner bought it from Montgomery 5 years ago. Good man, Turner, died a couple years back, left his wife to run the place, and she's selling." Another hesitation. "Not exactly. Word is she's behind on payments. Montgomery's foreclosing." Quinn's jaw tightened. "The original sale terms, 10 annual payments. Mrs. Turner's kept up until now, far as I know. And Montgomery can just take it back." The clerk shrugged uncomfortably. "There's a clause in all his contracts. If land values increase significantly, he can adjust the remaining payments." Legal, technically, not exactly neighborly. By the time Quinn left the land office, the western sky was ablaze with sunset colors. Instead of returning to the boarding house, he found himself riding toward the Turner property, guided by the clerk's directions. What he found was a modest homestead, a small but well-maintained house, a barn, fenced fields with corn standing tall, and an orchard of young fruit trees. The place spoke of hard work and care, not neglect or mismanagement. As he approached, he saw a woman carrying water from the well to a garden patch. She straightened at the sound of his horse, one hand shading her eyes against the setting sun, the other gripping a hoe with the casual readiness of someone who'd learned to be cautious. "Evening," Quinn called, stopping his horse at a respectful distance. "Mrs. Turner, who's asking?" Her voice carried clearly across the yard, wary but not fearful. "Quinn Westfield. I was in town looking at property and heard about your place." Her posture stiffened. "Mr. Montgomery works fast, I see. Come to size up your purchase before I'm even gone." Quinn dismounted, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. "Actually, I came to hear your side of the story." Hannah regarded the stranger with suspicion. He didn't look like Montgomery's usual associates, no fancy suit or air of condescension. His clothes were practical, if of good quality, and he had the weathered look of someone who worked outdoors. Still, experience had taught her caution. "My side is simple," she said, not moving from her spot by the garden. "My husband and I bought this land fair and square. We've made every payment on time. Now Montgomery wants to triple what we owe because the railroad's coming through and he knows I can't pay." Quinn nodded, maintaining his distance. The land office clerk mentioned something similar. Seems like a dishonest way to do business. Hannah gave a bitter laugh. That's Montgomery. He's done the same to half a dozen families in the past 2 years. Buys up land cheap, sells it with terms he can change at will, then takes it back when values rise and resells at a profit. And no one stops him. Who would? He practically owns the town. Judge Patterson plays cards with him every Thursday. She sighed, some of the fight leaving her. "Why are you really here, Mr. Westfield?" Quinn considered his answer carefully. "I came to Ordway looking for investment opportunities. Montgomery offered me this land, but something didn't sit right. Now I see why." "Well, you've satisfied your curiosity. In 3 weeks, this will be someone else's problem." She turned back toward the house, shoulders squared despite the defeat in her voice. "Mrs. Turner," Quinn called after her. "What if there was another option?" She paused but didn't turn. "There isn't. I've tried everything." "Maybe not everything. Would you allow me to come by tomorrow? I'd like to see the property properly if you're willing." Hannah finally turned, studying him with guarded eyes. "For what purpose?" "To make an informed decision," he replied honestly. "I promise not to take more than an hour of your time." After a long moment, she nodded. "Tomorrow morning, I'll be in the North Field until noon." Quinn tipped his hat and remounted his horse. As he rode back toward town in the gathering dusk, his mind was already turning over possibilities and plans. Something about Hannah Turner's quiet dignity and determination had struck a chord in him, reminding him of another woman who'd faced impossible odds years ago. His mother had lost everything when creditors came after his father's failed business. Quinn had been just 16, too young to stop the men who'd taken their home and left them with nothing but the clothes on their backs. That helplessness had driven him ever since to work harder, to build security, to ensure he'd never watch anyone he cared about suffer the same fate. Hannah was a stranger, but her fight was familiar. And Quinn had resources his 16-year-old self could only have dreamed of. The following morning, Hannah was inspecting her corn crop when she heard the approach of a horse. Quinn Westfield arrived precisely when he said he would, another point in his favor despite her lingering wariness. "Morning, Mrs. Turner," he greeted, dismounting with fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Mr. Westfield," she acknowledged. "As you can see, the corn's coming in well this year." Quinn surveyed the field, nodding appreciatively. "Good height, healthy color, you've done fine work here." "My husband chose the land for its soil, said it was some of the best in the county." Pride crept into her voice despite her efforts to remain detached. "The orchard's young still, but the trees took well. Another 2 years and they'll be producing properly." They walked the property, Hannah pointing out the creek that provided reliable water, the fertile bottomland where she grew vegetables, the pasture where she kept 2 milk cows and a few chickens. Quinn asked intelligent questions about crop rotation, water management, and yields, revealing a knowledge of farming that surprised her. "You said you were an investor," she remarked as they approached the barn. "Among other things," he replied. "Grew up on a farm in Missouri. Left when I was 17, but some lessons stay with you." Inside the barn, he examined the structure with a critical eye, noting the solid construction and thoughtful design. "Your husband built this," Hannah nodded. "Thomas was a carpenter before he decided to try farming. He had plans for expanding, adding another room to the house." Her voice trailed off. Quinn turned to face her directly. "Mrs. Turner, I'd like to make you a proposition." Her guard instantly rose. "Mr. Westfield, nothing improper," he assured her quickly. "A business arrangement." "How much do you owe Montgomery?" Hannah hesitated, then answered. $500 was the original remaining balance. Now he wants $3,000. Quinn nodded, unsurprised. "And if you had the 500, it wouldn't matter. He's changed the terms. The contract gives him that right when significant changes to local conditions affect property values. The railroad qualifies." What if someone else bought the debt from Montgomery, honored the original terms? Hope flared briefly in Hannah's eyes before caution extinguished it. Why would anyone do that? And why would Montgomery sell when he can make 6 times as much? "Let me worry about Montgomery," Quinn said. As for why this is good land, Mrs. Turner, land that should stay with someone who knows how to work it properly. I can't accept charity, Mr. Westfield. I'm not offering charity. I'm proposing a partnership. He outlined his idea. He would purchase her debt from Montgomery, allowing her to continue farming under the original payment schedule. In return, she would give him a small percentage of the harvest profits until the debt was repaid. Hannah studied him, searching for the catch. You'd make more money investing elsewhere, the railroads bringing opportunities that would yield 10 times what my little farm could produce. Quinn smiled slightly. Not everything is about maximizing profit, Mrs. Turner. Sometimes it's about doing what's right. After a pause, he added, I've seen too many good people pushed off their land by men like Montgomery. Maybe I'm tired of watching it happen. You don't know me. Why would you help a stranger? I know enough, he replied simply. I know you've kept this place running alone for 2 years. I know your crops are healthy and your fences are maintained. I know you're fighting to keep what's rightfully yours. He gestured toward the fields. This land has value beyond dollars, and you understand that. It deserves to stay in good hands. Hannah wanted desperately to believe him, but experience had taught her caution. I'll need time to think about it. Of course, I'll be in town for the week. He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded paper. My terms written out. Read them carefully, and if you have questions, I'm staying at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. After Quinn departed, Hannah sat at her kitchen table and read the document he'd left. The terms were straightforward and fair more than fair. She'd be able to keep her land, continue the work she and Thomas had started, and eventually own it outright, just as they'd planned. It seemed too good to be true, which was precisely what worried her. Men didn't offer such generous terms without wanting something in return, and Hannah had fended off enough unwanted advances since Thomas's death to be wary of apparent kindness. Yet something about Quinn Westfield seemed genuine. He'd asked intelligent questions about the farm, shown respect for her knowledge, and never once treated her as helpless or incapable. The next morning, Hannah hitched her wagon and drove into Ordway. Her first stop was the land office, where she asked the clerk what he knew about Quinn Westfield. Not much, madam, he admitted. Arrived a few days ago, been asking questions about property values, the railroad plans. Paid cash for some land west of town yesterday, 100 acres, sight unseen. He has money then, seems to. Doesn't flash it around like some do, but he's not short on funds. Her next stop was Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, where she left a message asking Quinn to meet her at the cafe at noon. Then she visited the general store, enduring the pitying glances of townsfolk who'd already heard about her impending eviction. At precisely noon, Quinn entered the small cafe on Main Street. He spotted Hannah at a corner table and made his way over, removing his hat as he sat. Mrs. Turner, he greeted her. Have you had a chance to consider my offer? I have, she replied, and I have some questions. They ordered coffee, and Hannah laid out her concerns why he would offer such favorable terms, what he truly expected in return, and whether he planned to stay in the area long-term. Quinn answered each question honestly. I came to Colorado looking for investment opportunities, yes, but also for a place to settle down. I've been moving for 15 years and I'm ready to stop. As for what I expect, exactly what's written in the agreement. A fair return on my investment and the satisfaction of thwarting a man who's built a fortune on others' misfortune. You seem to have a personal grudge against Mr. Montgomery, though you've only just met him. Quinn's expression darkened slightly. Not against him specifically. Against what he represents. I've seen his type before, men who use their power and influence to take advantage of those with less. My family lost everything to someone similar when I was young. Hannah studied him, searching for deceit and finding none. If I agree, how would this work? Montgomery won't sell to me directly. He won't know you're involved, Quinn explained. I'll approach him about buying your debt outright, make it seem like I'm following his playbook. Once the paperwork is transferred, we'll implement our agreement instead. After further discussion, Hannah finally nodded. I accept your terms, Mr. Westfield, but I want it understood that this is a business arrangement, nothing more. Quinn smiled, genuine warmth reaching his eyes. Understood completely, Mrs. Turner. I'll speak with Montgomery today. True to his word, Quinn visited Montgomery that afternoon. The older man received him in the same study, clearly pleased to see the potential buyer return so quickly. "Have you made a decision about the Turner property?" Montgomery asked, offering a cigar that Quinn politely declined. "I have," Quinn replied, "but I'm interested in a slightly different arrangement than we discussed." Montgomery raised an eyebrow. "Oh, instead of waiting for the eviction, I'd like to purchase Mrs. Turner's debt directly from you now." The older man leaned back, studying Quinn with newfound interest. "Her debt is substantial, $3,000. The original debt was $500, Quinn countered calmly. The additional amount is based on speculation about future value. "I'm offering you $800 immediate payment, no waiting for the eviction process, no potential complications." Montgomery chuckled. "You underestimate me, Mr. Westfield. That land will be worth 5 times its current value once the railroad comes through. Why would I accept less now?" "Because money in hand is always worth more than promises of future gains," Quinn replied. "And because I'm also interested in the Miller property to the west, the 100 acres you've been trying to sell for 2 years. This caught Montgomery's attention. The Miller land was less desirable, rocky in parts, with poorer soil, and had sat on his books as a failed investment for too long. "You want both properties?" Quinn nodded. "For the right price. Immediate payment, no complications." Montgomery considered, his shrewd mind calculating profits and possibilities. "The Miller land is listed at $1,200. With the Turner debt at $800, as you suggest, that would be $2,000 total. $1,500 for both," Quinn countered. "The Miller land needs significant improvement to be viable, as you well know." After some negotiation, they settled on $1,700 for both the Miller land and Hannah's debt. Montgomery drafted the paperwork immediately, eager to offload the troublesome Miller property and secure a tidy profit on the Turner debt, even if it was less than he'd hoped for. "May I ask what you plan to do with Mrs. Turner?" Montgomery inquired as Quinn counted out the payment in banknotes. "She's been difficult." Quinn kept his expression neutral. "I find that people respond differently depending on how they're approached. I don't anticipate any problems." As he rode back to town with the signed documents, Quinn felt a satisfaction that went beyond a successful negotiation. For the first time in years, he'd used his business acumen for something that felt genuinely worthwhile. Hannah was waiting anxiously at her farm when Quinn arrived that evening. The sight of the papers in his hand made her heart race with mingled hope and fear. "It's done," he announced, dismounting. "Montgomery sold your debt and the Miller property to the west for $1,700 total." He seemed quite pleased with himself. Relief washed over Hannah's features. "Then we can proceed with our arrangement." "We can." Quinn handed her the documents. "According to these, I now hold the note on your property. But according to this," he produced another document from his pocket, "our actual agreement stands. $500, payable over 5 years at the original terms with 10% of harvest profits until it's paid off." Hannah took the papers with trembling hands. "I don't know how to thank you." "There's no need," Quinn assured her. "This benefits us both. The railroad will increase property values throughout the region, including the Miller land. And having a successful farm next door will only enhance its appeal to future buyers." Despite his practical explanation, Hannah sensed there was more to his motives. "Will you be staying in Ordway then, to develop the Miller property?" "That's the plan. I've wired for some equipment and supplies. Thought I might try my hand at ranching. The land's better suited for cattle than crops." As spring turned to summer, Quinn began the hard work of transforming the Rocky Miller property into a viable ranch. He hired local men to help clear land, build fences, and construct a modest house and barn. Word spread quickly that he paid fair wages and treated workers with respect, earning him goodwill in the community despite his status as a newcomer. Hannah watched these developments with interest from her adjacent farm. True to their agreement, Quinn maintained a respectful distance, visiting only occasionally to discuss business matters or to offer assistance with particularly demanding farm tasks. During one such visit in late June, Hannah was struggling to repair a broken water pump when Quinn rode up. Without being asked, he dismounted and examined the mechanism. Main seals worn through, he observed. I've got a replacement at my place. Mind if I fetch it? Hannah wiped sweat from her brow. That's kind of you, but I can't keep accepting help without giving anything in return. Quinn straightened, considering her words. How about a trade, then? I fix your pump, you show me how you make that sourdough bread I smelled baking last time I was here. Hannah couldn't help but smile. That hardly seems equal. You haven't tasted my cooking, Quinn replied with a grin. Believe me, it's more than fair. That evening, after the pump was repaired, Hannah found herself teaching Quinn the basics of bread making in her small kitchen. The domestic scene felt strangely comfortable, his tall frame moving easily around her space, his attention focused intently on her instructions. My mother taught me this recipe, she explained as she demonstrated how to knead the dough. Said a good loaf of bread could make even the poorest meal seem like a feast. Quinn nodded. Wise woman. My mother was the same way, could make something out of nothing. After my father died and we lost the farm, she kept us fed somehow, never let on how hard it was. You said you left home at 17, Hannah recalled. That seems young. Quinn's hands stilled on the dough. There wasn't much left for us in Missouri. I headed west, found work on cattle drives, sent money home when I could. His voice softened. She passed 5 years ago. Never got to see that I'd finally made something of myself. The vulnerability in his admission touched something in Hannah. I'm sure she knew. Mothers always do. Their conversation flowed more easily after that shared moment of honesty. Hannah found herself speaking about Thomas, how they'd met in Denver, his dreams for their farm, the illness that had taken him so suddenly. Quinn listened without platitudes or awkward sympathy, offering instead the simple comfort of attentive silence. As weeks passed, these exchanges became more frequent. Quinn would bring news from town or offer help with a difficult task. Hannah would share vegetables from her garden or advice about local growing conditions. Their initial business relationship gradually evolved into a tentative friendship built on mutual respect and shared experiences. By August, Quinn's ranch was taking shape. A modest but well-built house stood on a rise overlooking the property, and the first herd of cattle, 30 head, purchased from a rancher north of Denver, grazed in fenced pastures. He'd hired 2 young men as permanent hands and established himself as a fair-minded, hard-working neighbor in the community. Hannah's corn crop flourished that summer, promising the best harvest since Thomas's death. The orchard trees were healthy, the vegetable garden abundant, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that she might not just survive, but thrive on the land she and Thomas had loved. When harvest time arrived in September, Quinn offered the help of his ranch hands. Hannah initially declined, proud and determined to manage on her own as she had for the past 2 years. But when an early storm threatened to damage the corn before it could be fully harvested, she reluctantly accepted. Quinn arrived with his men at dawn the day after the storm passed. The ground was still muddy, making the work harder, but with 4 people instead of 1, they made quick progress. By midday, they'd harvested a third of the field. Hannah insisted on providing lunch, setting out a simple but hearty meal of ham sandwiches, pickled vegetables, and apple pie on a table beneath the old oak tree. As they ate, one of the young ranch hands, Billy, asked about the neat grave marker visible from their vantage point. My husband, Hannah explained quietly. He wanted to be buried on the land he loved. Billy nodded respectfully, then glanced between Hannah and Quinn with youthful curiosity. You 2 known each other long? Quinn shot the young man a warning look, but Hannah answered with a small smile. Mr. Westfield saved this farm from foreclosure earlier this year. We have a business arrangement. Best boss I ever had, Billy offered, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrents. Treats us fair, works alongside us, even teaches Jed here to read in the evenings. The other ranch hand, a shy boy barely 20, ducked his head in embarrassment. Just learning my letters is all. Quinn changed the subject, but Hannah found herself watching him with new eyes as they returned to the harvest. She'd known he was a decent man, his actions had proven that, but these small revelations about his character continued to surprise her. The harvest took 3 days to complete, yielding more corn than Hannah had anticipated. With Quinn's connections in Denver, she secured a better price than she'd received in previous years, allowing her to make her scheduled payment with money to spare. When she brought the payment to Quinn's ranch in early October, she found him mending a fence in the crisp autumn air. He straightened as she approached, pushing his hat back to reveal features that had grown increasingly familiar over the past months. "Mrs. Turner," he greeted her with a smile. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Hannah dismounted, retrieving an envelope from her saddlebag. "My first payment, right on schedule, and a little extra from the harvest profits, as we agreed." Quinn accepted the envelope without opening it. "I trust your accounting. How does it feel to have such a successful harvest?" "Like vindication," she admitted. "After Thomas died, more than one person in town suggested I couldn't manage alone, that I should sell and move back east to family." "Do you have family there?" She shook her head. "No one close. My parents passed years ago, and my only sister married a man who took her to California. We write occasionally, but..." She shrugged. "This is my home now." Quinn nodded in understanding. "Sometimes the family we make for ourselves matters more than the one we're born to." "Is that why you came west, to make a new family?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "I came west because there was nothing left for me in Missouri. Stayed because I found purpose in the work, freedom in the open country." He paused, looking out over the land. "As for family, never seemed to be in the cards for me. Trail life isn't conducive to settling down." "But you're settled now," Hannah observed. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared solitude, of lives shaped by loss and resilience. "I suppose I am," Quinn acknowledged softly. The moment stretched between them until Hannah looked away, suddenly conscious of how personal their conversation had become. "I should get back. There's still work to do before winter sets in." Quinn nodded, respecting her retreat. "Of course, thank you for the payment." As Hannah rode home, she found herself thinking about Quinn more than she cared to admit. It had been a long time since she'd allowed herself to see any man as more than a neighbor or potential threat to her independence. Quinn was neither. He'd proven himself an ally and had scrupulously respected her boundaries. Yet something about him stirred feelings she'd thought buried with Thomas. His quiet strength, his integrity, the gentle humor that occasionally broke through his reserved exterior, these qualities drew her despite her determination to focus solely on her farm and her survival. Winter came early that year, blanketing Ordway and the surrounding countryside in snow by mid-November. The harsh weather isolated the outlying farms and ranches, limiting travel to essential journeys for supplies or medical emergencies. Hannah had prepared well, with a full root cellar, preserved fruits and vegetables, and enough firewood to last through the coldest months. Still, the isolation weighed on her as days shortened and temperatures dropped. During the worst storms, she found herself thinking of Quinn, wondering how he and his young ranch hands were faring in their newly built home. Her answer came during a particularly vicious blizzard in early December. The wind howled around her small house, rattling windows and driving snow into drifts that nearly reached the eaves in places. Hannah was banking the fire for the night when she heard a pounding at her door that rose above the storm's wail. Grabbing her father's old shotgun, a precaution she'd never abandoned despite the relative safety of her isolated farm, she approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" "Quinn Westfield," came the reply, barely audible above the wind. "And Billy, Jed's hurt, need help." Hannah unbolted the door immediately, struggling against the force of the wind to pull it open. Quinn stumbled in, supporting a half-frozen Billy who in turn helped carry an unconscious Jed. All three were covered in snow, their faces raw from the biting cold. "What happened?" Hannah demanded, closing the door against the storm and hurrying to stoke the fire higher. "Barn roof partially collapsed under the snow," Quinn explained, his voice tight with concern. "Jed was inside, checking on a sick calf. Beam caught him across the back. We couldn't make it to town in this." Hannah directed them to place Jed on her bed, then quickly assessed the young man's injuries. "His breathing's steady, but he's ice cold. We need to warm him gradually." She turned to Billy, who was shivering violently. You too, get out of those wet clothes, I'll find you something dry. While Quinn and Billy followed her instructions, Hannah prepared hot broth and gathered medical supplies. Thomas's old clothes were retrieved from a trunk oversized for Billy, but better than freezing. For the next hour, they worked together to raise Jed's body temperature and examine his injuries. The beam had left a large bruise across his lower back, but his spine seemed intact and he eventually regained consciousness, groggy but alert. Nothing broken, as far as I can tell, Hannah concluded, covering Jed with another blanket. But he'll be sore for weeks and he needs rest. Quinn nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Thank you, if we'd been stuck out there much longer. You would have found another solution, Hannah said firmly. You're not a man who gives up easily. Their eyes met over Jed's bed and Quinn's expression softened. Neither are you, Mrs. Turner. The storm raged for 2 more days, forcing all 4 to remain in Hannah's small house. Space was tight. Jed in the bedroom, Billy on a pallet near the fire, and Quinn and Hannah taking turns sleeping in the rocking chair or on a makeshift bed of blankets on the floor. Despite the cramped conditions, they established a functional routine. Quinn ventured out twice daily to check on both their property's livestock, returning with news and fresh milk. Hannah cooked and tended to Jed, whose condition improved steadily. Billy proved surprisingly helpful with household tasks, eager to repay Hannah's hospitality. During the long evenings, with the wind howling outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, they shared stories and conversation. Hannah discovered that Quinn had fought briefly in the latter days of the Civil War, had driven cattle from Texas to Kansas more times than he could count, and had a remarkable memory for poetry, which he'd learned from a trail cook who carried a volume of Tennyson in his saddlebags. In turn, she found herself sharing memories she'd kept private for years, her childhood in Pennsylvania, how she'd scandalized her family by traveling west alone at 20 to teach in a frontier school, meeting Thomas when he built an addition to the schoolhouse. On the 3rd morning, they awoke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white broken only by the dark shapes of trees and buildings half buried in snow. We should head back, Quinn said after breakfast, glancing at Jed, who was now able to sit up with assistance. The cattle will need tending, and you could use your house back. Hannah felt a surprising reluctance at the thought of their departure. The past days, despite their cause, had been the least lonely she'd experienced in years. Jed's still weak. Perhaps he should stay another day or 2. Quinn studied her for a moment, then nodded. If you're certain it's not an imposition. Billy and I can manage the ranch if you're willing to keep an eye on him. So it was arranged. Billy and Quinn departed with promises to return that evening with supplies and news, leaving Hannah with Jed, who spent most of the day sleeping or listening attentively as she read aloud from one of her few books. Mr. Westfield talks about you, you know, Jed mentioned during one of his wakeful periods. Says you're the strongest woman he's ever known. Hannah looked up from her mending, startled. He said that, Jed nodded. Said any man with sense would see your value. Billy teases him something fierce about it, but Mr. Westfield just goes quiet. Hannah felt a warmth rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire's heat. Mr. Westfield and I are business associates and neighbors, nothing more. If you say so, madam, Jed replied, unconvinced. Just know he ain't the type to speak highly of folks unless he means it. When Quinn returned that evening with Billy and fresh supplies, Hannah found herself watching him with new awareness. He moved with a quiet efficiency around her small kitchen, helping prepare dinner while Billy regaled Jed with tales of their snow-clearing adventures. Later, as Quinn prepared to leave with Billy, Hannah accompanied him to the door. The storms left quite a mess, she observed, looking out at the moonlit snow. Will you need help with repairs to the barn? Quinn adjusted his scarf. We'll manage. I've sent word to town for lumber, though it may be a few days before the roads are passable for wagons. I could come by tomorrow if you'd like, while Jed rests. Quinn looked surprised, then pleased. I'd welcome the company. And the extra hands. The following day, Hannah bundled up and made her way through the snow to Quinn's ranch. The damage to the barn was significant, a partial collapse of the roof in one corner where snow had drifted deepest. Quinn and Billy had already cleared the debris and were measuring for replacement beams when she arrived. "Didn't expect you so early," Quinn greeted her, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Jed doing all right, sleeping peacefully when I left. I made him breakfast and left lunch within reach." She surveyed the damage. "Where do you need me?" For the next several hours, they worked together to shore up the remaining structure and prepare for more permanent repairs. Hannah proved as capable with a hammer and saw as she was with a hoe and plow, earning impressed glances from Billy and quiet appreciation from Quinn. During a brief break for lunch, bread, cheese, and hot coffee prepared in the ranch house, Quinn found himself watching Hannah as she brushed sawdust from her sleeve. The past months had changed his perception of her. Where he'd once seen only a proud, embattled widow fighting to keep her land, he now recognized a woman of remarkable depth and resilience, intelligent, capable, and unexpectedly witty when she let her guard down. "You're staring, Mr. Westfield," Hannah observed without looking up. Quinn didn't bother denying it. "Just thinking how different my life might have been if I'd met someone like you years ago." Her eyes met his, and for once she didn't look away. Different how? Might not have spent so many years drifting, might have found something worth staying for sooner. The air between them seemed to still, the distant sounds of Billy working outside fading as Hannah considered his words. "And have you found something worth staying for?" "I believe I have," Quinn replied softly. The moment was broken by Billy's return, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of possibilities that neither had been ready to consider before. Over the next week, as Jed recovered enough to return to the ranch, and winter settled in earnest over the Colorado countryside, Quinn and Hannah established a new pattern. He would visit her farm every few days, ostensibly to check on her welfare during the harsh weather. She would reciprocate, bringing freshly baked bread or preserved fruit, staying to share a meal or help with indoor projects as the short winter days limited outdoor work. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond the practicalities of farming and ranching to more personal territories, hopes, disappointments, the events that had shaped them. Quinn spoke of his years on the trail, the loneliness he'd never acknowledged to anyone else, the gradual accumulation of wealth that had seemed hollow without purpose. Hannah shared her fears after Thomas's death, how she'd faced down not just Montgomery's schemes, but also her own doubts about her ability to survive alone. "I used to wake up terrified," she admitted one evening as they sat by her fire, a rare snowless night allowing Quinn to make the journey between their properties. Not just of failing, but of succeeding and still being alone, of building something meaningful and having no one to share it with. Quinn's hand found hers in the firelight. "And now," Hannah looked down at their joined hands, "now I'm less afraid. Of all of it." As February arrived with its alternating spells of bitter cold and unexpected thaws, the people of Ordway buzzed with news of the railroad's progress. Construction crews were working their way steadily toward the town, bringing with them the promise of prosperity and growth that had driven Montgomery's land speculation. The man himself had been notably absent from Hannah's life since Quinn had purchased her debt, but his shadow lengthened once more when she encountered Wilkes, his business associate, in the general store one icy afternoon. "Mrs. Turner," he greeted her with false cordiality. "Still holding on to that little farm, I see. Mr. Westfield must be a very patient creditor." Hannah selected a sack of flour without acknowledging his barb. "Mr. Wilkes, I trust you're well." "Quite well, thank you. Mr. Montgomery and I have been busy preparing for the railroad's arrival." "Such exciting times ahead." He paused, adjusting his spectacles. "Though I must say we were surprised by Mr. Westfield's interest in your property, not his usual type of investment from what we've gathered about his business history." Hannah stiffened slightly. "Mr. Westfield sees value where others might not." "Indeed," Wilkes replied, his tone insinuating. "One wonders what particular value he finds in a struggling widow's farm, but then men often have diverse motivations." The implication was clear, and Hannah felt heat rise to her face, partly from anger, partly from the uncomfortable knowledge that similar whispers had likely circulated in town as her friendship with Quinn became known. Mr. Westfield has been nothing but honorable in our business dealings, she said firmly. Unlike some in this community, Wilkes merely smiled. Of course, I meant no offense. Good day, Mrs. Turner. The encounter left Hannah unsettled. While she had no cause to care about town gossip, she realized that her growing feelings for Quinn and his for her were becoming apparent to others. The protective barrier of formal business association was wearing thin, revealing the deeper connection developing beneath. When Quinn visited 2 days later, bringing news that the lumber for his barn repairs had finally arrived, Hannah found herself more reserved than usual. He noticed immediately. "Something troubling you?" he asked as they sat at her kitchen table, steam rising from cups of coffee between them. Hannah hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I encountered Mr. Wilkes in town. He made certain insinuations about our arrangement." Quinn's expression darkened. "What kind of insinuations?" "The kind that suggest a woman alone might secure favorable terms from a male creditor through means other than honest business." She met his eyes directly. "The kind that will become more common as people notice how often you visit. And that bothers you, what people think." "It bothers me that it might affect how people perceive you, your standing in the community." Quinn's laugh held no humor. "Hannah, I've spent most of my adult life not caring what anyone thought of me. I'm not about to start now." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it hung in the air between them. "Besides," he continued more gently, "we both know the truth of our arrangement. Nothing improper has occurred." "No," Hannah agreed, "nothing improper." Something in her tone made Quinn study her more carefully. "Is that what's really troubling you? That nothing has occurred?" The directness of the question took her breath away. For months they had circled each other, friendship deepening into something more, neither willing to cross the invisible line between them. Now Quinn had named it, bringing into the open what had been unspoken. "I don't know what I want," Hannah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. I had to focus on survival, on keeping this land. There wasn't room for anything else." Quinn reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "And now I find myself thinking of possibilities I'd set aside, but I'm afraid, Quinn. Afraid of opening myself to loss again, afraid of what it would mean for our agreement, for my independence." "Your independence is part of what I admire most about you," Quinn said softly. "I'd never ask you to sacrifice that. As for our agreement paper can be rewritten, lives can change course." Hannah looked down at their joined hands. "I need time to be certain." "Time is something we have plenty of," Quinn assured her, though the warmth in his eyes suggested he hoped it wouldn't be too long. As February gave way to March, and the first tentative signs of spring appeared, Quinn respected Hannah's request for time, maintaining their friendship while allowing her space to consider what might come next. He continued his visits, but kept them briefer, more focused on practical matters, giving her room to sort through her feelings without pressure. Hannah found herself missing the longer conversations, the quiet evenings by the fire when it had seemed the most natural thing in the world to imagine a future with Quinn in it. Yet she knew her caution was necessary. A second chance at love was unexpected enough. She wouldn't rush into it without certainty. The turning point came in early April, when the railroad crews reached Ordway at last. The town transformed overnight, crawling with workers, speculators, and travelers. Property values soared just as Montgomery had predicted, and new construction began on both ends of Main Street. Hannah rode into town for supplies one warm afternoon to find the usually quiet streets bustling with activity. The general store was crowded with unfamiliar faces, and prices had already begun to climb in response to increased demand. As she waited to pay for her purchases, she overheard two men discussing recent land sales. "Montgomery's making a killing," one commented. "That parcel north of town he sold for 3 times what he paid, not 6 months ago." "Smart man," the other replied. "Heard he's trying to buy back some land he sold to a newcomer last year fellow named Westfield, offering twice the purchase price." Hannah froze, her heart suddenly pounding. She hadn't seen Quinn in 3 days. He'd mentioned a trip to Denver for supplies, expected to take most of the week. Had Montgomery approached him in her absence, She completed her purchase quickly and headed for the land office, hoping to learn more. The clerk confirmed what she'd overheard. Mr. Montgomery's been making offers on several properties, including the old Miller land that Mr. Westfield bought. Railroads planning a spur line that would run right through it, make it prime for development. And has Mr. Westfield responded to the offer? Hannah asked, trying to keep her voice casual. The clerk shrugged. Not that I've heard. He's been in Denver most of the week. Montgomery's eager, though sent Wilkes out to the ranch yesterday with paperwork, just waiting for signatures. Hannah thanked him and left, her mind racing. Quinn hadn't mentioned any offer from Montgomery, but then it had apparently come while he was away. Would he sell? The profit would be substantial, and while he'd spoken of settling in Ordway, he'd spent most of his life moving from opportunity to opportunity. What was to keep him from taking Montgomery's money and seeking the next venture elsewhere? The thought of Quinn leaving, of losing not just the man she'd come to care for, but also the security of their arrangement, sent a chill through her despite the spring sunshine. For months she'd held back, protecting her heart, asking for time she suddenly feared might have run out. Without conscious decision, she found herself riding toward Quinn's ranch instead of home. She needed to know his intentions, needed to speak the words she'd been holding back before it was too late. The ranch was quiet when she arrived, with no sign of Billy or Jed. Quinn's horse wasn't in the corral, suggesting he hadn't yet returned from Denver. Hannah hesitated, unsure whether to wait or leave a message, when she noticed smoke rising from the chimney of the ranch house. Someone was home after all. She approached the door and knocked firmly. After a moment, it opened to reveal not one of the ranch hands, but Elias Montgomery himself. Mrs. Turner, he greeted her, surprise evident in his voice. This is unexpected. Hannah stared at him, momentarily speechless. Mr. Montgomery, I was looking for Mr. Westfield. I'm afraid he's not here. I'm simply waiting to discuss some business with him upon his return. Montgomery stepped aside. Would you care to come in? Perhaps we could both await him together. Every instinct warned against entering, but Hannah's need for information overcame her caution. She stepped inside, noting that the usually tidy main room of Quinn's house showed signs of prolonged occupation, papers spread across the table, a half-empty bottle of brandy beside them. You've been here some time, she observed. Montgomery smiled thinly. Mr. Wilkes and I have been finalizing the details of our offer for this property. Mr. Westfield expressed interest when we spoke in Denver yesterday. He's expected back this evening to sign the papers. Hannah felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. He's selling. Of course, Montgomery replied, watching her reaction with undisguised satisfaction. It's an exceptional offer, 3 times what he paid only months ago. A man would be a fool to refuse. And what of our agreement? Hannah asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. He holds the note on my property. Montgomery waved a dismissive hand. A minor detail. The note transfers to me as part of our arrangement. Don't worry, my dear, I'll honor the original terms. His smile widened. For now. Hannah understood then. Montgomery hadn't given up on acquiring her land. He'd simply found a more indirect route. By purchasing Quinn's holdings, he would once again control her fate, able to adjust the terms, find loopholes, eventually force her out just as he'd planned before Quinn's intervention. Quinn wouldn't agree to that, she said, but doubt crept into her voice. How well did she really know him? They'd known each other less than a year, and for all his apparent integrity, he was still a businessman first. A significant profit might outweigh any personal considerations. I assure you, he was quite amenable to the terms when we discussed them, Montgomery replied smoothly. Men like Westfield don't put down roots, Mrs. Turner, they follow opportunity. It's their nature. Before Hannah could respond, the door opened and Wilkes entered, stopping short at the sight of her. Mrs. Turner, what brings you here? Mrs. Turner was just leaving, Montgomery answered for her. She came looking for Westfield, but as we've explained, he won't be back until this evening. Hannah stood her ground. Actually, I think I'll wait, since this business concerns me as well. Montgomery's expression hardened. This is a private business matter between Mr. Westfield and myself. Your presence isn't required or desired. I disagree, came a new voice from the doorway. All three turned to see Quinn standing there, trail dust still on his clothes, his expression thunderous as he took in the scene before him. "Quinn," Montgomery recovered quickly, extending his hand. "We were just discussing our arrangement. I've brought the paperwork, as promised." Quinn ignored the offered hand, his gaze moving to Hannah. "Are you all right?" she nodded, relief washing over her at his unexpected appearance. "Fine, just concerned about what Mr. Montgomery was telling me." "And what exactly was that?" Quinn asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Simply that you've agreed to sell your properties to me," Montgomery replied smoothly. "Including the Turner note, a most profitable arrangement for you." Quinn's laugh held no humor. "That's interesting, considering I never agreed to any such thing." Montgomery's smile faltered. "In Denver, we discussed your interest in buying," Quinn interrupted. "I told you I'd consider any written offer, which is standard business courtesy. I never indicated I would accept." Wilkes stepped forward. "The terms are quite generous, Mr. Westfield. 3 times your investment in just months. Few men would hesitate." "I'm not most men." Quinn's gaze returned to Hannah, softening slightly. "And some things aren't for sale at any price." Montgomery's face flushed with anger. "Don't be a fool, Westfield. This is business, not sentiment. The railroads coming this land will be worth a fortune for development." "I'm aware of the railroad's plans," Quinn replied calmly. "In fact, I've already been in discussions with their representatives about grazing contracts to supply the construction crews with beef. My cattle operation stays right here." Hannah felt a rush of relief so profound it weakened her knees. Quinn hadn't been planning to sell, hadn't been negotiating behind her back. He'd meant what he said about putting down roots. Montgomery wasn't finished. "What about the Turner woman's note, then? Surely that's of no use to your cattle operation. I'll pay double its value." Quinn's expression hardened again. "Mrs. Turner's arrangement with me is not negotiable, not at any price." He moved to the door, opening it pointedly. "I believe our business is concluded, gentlemen." For a moment, Montgomery looked as though he might argue further, but something in Quinn's stance, the quiet confidence of a man who would not be moved, seemed to convince him of the futility. With a tight nod, he gathered his papers from the table. "You're making a mistake, Westfield, one you'll regret when you see what that land becomes worth." "I doubt that very much," Quinn replied evenly. "Good day." After Montgomery and Wilkes departed, a silence fell over the room. Hannah stood by the table, emotions warring within her, relief, lingering fear, and something deeper that she could no longer deny. "You came looking for me," Quinn said at last, his voice gentle. "Why?" Hannah met his gaze directly. "I heard Montgomery was offering to buy your land. I was afraid." "Afraid you might take it, might leave." "Leave Ordway? Leave you?" Quinn moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. "Hannah, I told you I'd found something worth staying for. People say things they don't always mean," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And you'd been gone in Denver, where Montgomery claimed to have spoken with you." "I went to Denver to order breeding stock for the ranch," Quinn explained. "Yes, Montgomery approached me there, and yes, I listened to his initial offer. That's all." His hand reached out, tentatively brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I have no intention of selling this land, or of leaving." The touch broke something open inside Hannah, the last barrier of caution she'd maintained around her heart. "I've been afraid," she admitted, "of depending on anyone again, of opening myself to loss, but today, when I thought you might be gone." Quinn's hand cupped her cheek. "I'm not going anywhere, Hannah, not unless you send me away." "I don't want to send you away," she whispered. "I want." She faltered, then found her courage. "I want to stop being afraid. I want to trust what I feel for you, what I think you feel for me." "And what do you think I feel?" Hannah met his gaze steadily. "I think you love me, I hope you do, because I've realized I love you." The words, once spoken, seemed to transform the air between them. Quinn's expression softened into a smile that reached his eyes, warming them to the color of summer sky. "You hope correctly," he said softly, drawing her closer. "I love you, Hannah Turner, have for months now." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer both. When they parted, Hannah felt as though something long broken inside her had begun to heal. "What happens now?" she asked, her hands resting against his chest. Quinn smiled. "Whatever we want." Your farm is secure, my ranch is taking shape, and Montgomery has finally gotten the message that neither is for sale. And us? What becomes of our arrangement? That depends, Quinn replied. I'm quite happy with our current terms, but I'd be open to negotiating a more permanent arrangement. One that might involve combining our properties, our lives. Hannah felt a surge of joy mingled with a last flicker of uncertainty. You're proposing marriage, I'm proposing possibility, Quinn clarified. When you're ready. I've waited this long to find you, I can wait longer if that's what you need. Hannah considered this, appreciating his understanding of her need for independence, for certainty in her choices. I think, she said carefully, that I've done enough waiting. We both have. In the weeks that followed, Hannah and Quinn moved forward with the care of people who had known loss and valued what they'd found in each other. They continued their separate lives, she on her farm, he on his ranch, but the boundaries between them gradually dissolved. Hannah helped Quinn select breeding stock for his growing herd. Quinn assisted with preparations for Hannah's spring planting. They shared meals, stories, and increasingly, their hopes for a shared future. By June, when Hannah's orchard burst into late bloom and Quinn's first calves thrived in the summer pastures, they were ready to formalize what had grown between them. The wedding was a small affair, held beneath the oak tree where Thomas was buried, a location Hannah chose with careful thought. He would have approved of you, she told Quinn the evening before the ceremony as they walked the boundary between their properties. Thomas wanted me to be happy, to keep the farm thriving. You've helped make both possible. Quinn squeezed her hand. I hope to make you happy for many years to come. The following day, before a small gathering of friends, Quinn's ranch hands, a few neighbors, and the minister from Ordway, they exchanged vows. Hannah wore a new blue dress rather than traditional white, a choice that felt right for a second marriage built on practicality as much as romance. Quinn, cleaned up and in his best suit, couldn't take his eyes off her. I, Quinn Westfield, take you, Hannah Turner, to be my wife, he promised, his voice steady and sure. To share in your strength, to support your independence, to build a future on the foundation you've already laid. I promise to be your partner in all things, to love you through all seasons, and to never take for granted the gift of your trust. Hannah's answering vows were equally heartfelt. I, Hannah Turner, take you, Quinn Westfield, to be my husband. To share with you the land I've fought to keep, to embrace the future we'll build together, and to open my heart fully to the love I never expected to find again. I promise to be your equal partner, your strongest supporter, and to remember each day the blessing of this second chance. Their life together began with practical decisions, maintaining Hannah's farmhouse as their primary residence, while using Quinn's larger ranch house for ranch business and occasional guests. They integrated their operations, with Hannah's crops and orchards complementing Quinn's growing cattle herd, creating a diversified and increasingly prosperous enterprise. As summer turned to fall, they completed the harvest together, the combined effort of their households making lighter work of what had once been Hannah's solitary burden. With the profits, they made the final payment on her land, now their land, officially ending any remaining business obligation between them. Quinn insisted on a small celebration to mark the occasion. On a crisp October evening, he presented Hannah with the canceled note and a deed to her farm, now transferred fully into her name alone. I don't understand, Hannah said, examining the documents. Why just my name? We're married now. Because this land was always yours, Quinn explained, taking her hands in his. You fought for it, worked it alone, refused to give up on it when most would have. It should remain in your name as it would have been if Montgomery hadn't tried to change the terms. Tears filled Hannah's eyes. You bought this land to save a stranger. Now you're giving it back, Quinn smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. I bought it because it was the right thing to do. I'm giving it to you because I love you, and because I want you to know that what's between us has nothing to do with property or debt. You're not beholden to me, Hannah. You never were. The gesture, so typical of Quinn's quiet integrity, moved Hannah deeply. Thank you, she whispered, then with a smile added, but you should know that everything I have is yours as well. That's what partnership means. Quinn nodded, drawing her close. And we are partners. In all things, the years that followed proved the truth of those words. Together, they weathered the challenges that came with frontier life, drought seasons and harsh winters, fluctuating market prices and occasional conflicts with neighboring ranchers. They celebrated the triumphs as well, bumper crops and healthy calves, the gradual expansion of their holdings as they purchased adjacent land that Montgomery, in his hubris, had overextended himself to acquire and then been forced to sell at a loss. 2 years after their marriage, Hannah gave birth to a son they named Thomas Quinn Westfield, honoring both the past and present. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 18 months later. The children grew strong in the Colorado air, learning early the value of hard work, integrity, and the land that was their heritage. Ordway grew as well, the railroad bringing increased commerce and population. Quinn and Hannah played their part in the town's development, helping establish a proper school, contributing to the building of a new church, and advocating for fair business practices that would allow small landowners to thrive alongside larger operations. Montgomery eventually left Ordway for Denver, his grand schemes for land monopoly thwarted by changing railroad plans and his own overreach. Wilkes remained, eventually finding an unexpected niche as the town's first banker, a position in which, under the watchful eyes of more ethical businessmen like Quinn, he gradually developed a reluctant integrity of his own. On the 5th anniversary of their marriage, Quinn and Hannah stood together on the porch of their farmhouse, expanded now to accommodate their growing family, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Do you ever regret it?" Hannah asked, leaning against Quinn's solid presence. "Staying here instead of selling to Montgomery, you could have made a fortune." Quinn's arm tightened around her waist. "I did make a fortune," he replied softly, "just not the kind that's measured in dollars." Hannah smiled, understanding completely. Together, they had built something far more valuable than wealth, a partnership founded on respect and trust, a family nurtured by love, and a legacy of land that would sustain generations to come. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, talking quietly of plans for the coming season, improvements to the ranch, and their hopes for their children's futures. The years had deepened their connection, transforming initial attraction into an enduring bond strengthened by shared purpose and mutual respect. The land that had once been a battleground had become the foundation for a life neither could have imagined when they first met Hannah fighting desperately to keep her farm, Quinn seeking a place to belong after years of wandering. Together, they had found not just security but a happiness that neither had dared hope for, proving that sometimes the most valuable titles weren't written on deeds, but inscribed on hearts that had found their way home at last.